The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, which felt like the universe had specifically chosen the most boring day of the week to detonate a grenade in Haley Novak's kitchen. She was eating cereal, the store brand kind, because the good stuff was $4 more, and $4 was gas money, when she saw the envelope propped against the fruit bowl her mother had given her years ago. The bowl that never had fruit in it, the bowl that currently held a hair elastic, a dead AAA battery, and 17 cents in change. The return address said Mr. and Mrs. Brendan Falco, not yet married, but the Mrs. was already printed in gold. Haley set down her spoon, stared at the envelope, picked it back up and read it again, as though the second pass might change what was written there. It did not. Her ex-fiancé was getting married, in 6 weeks, at the Ashford Manor Hotel outside Ottawa, which was the kind of place that had a prix-fixe menu and a valet who judged you for your shoes, and he had invited her. She called her best friend Joanna at 7:40 in the morning, which was the kind of thing you were allowed to do when your ex-fiancé sent you a wedding invitation and expected you to show up and smile about it. He invited you, Joanna said flatly. He invited me to watch him marry someone else at Ashford Manor. Haley, I know, tell me you're not going. Haley looked at the invitation, the gold lettering, the little watercolor of the Ottawa River on the back. Brendan had always had good taste in stationery. She'd give him that. I think I have to go, she said. Joanna made a sound that was equal parts disbelief and exhaustion. Why? Because if I don't go, he wins. He already won. He's marrying a woman with a trust fund and a personal trainer. The winning happened. He wins psychologically. Haley, if I don't show up, he spends the rest of his life thinking I was too heartbroken to face him. And I refuse to let Brendan Falco have that. She paused. I need a date. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I'm busy that weekend, Joanna said immediately. I wasn't asking you. Good, because I'm busy. The problem was that Haley did not have a date. She had not had a date in 14 months, which was approximately how long it had been since Brendan had handed back her grandmother's ring and explained very reasonably, very calmly, that he didn't think they wanted the same things anymore. What he had meant, she later understood, was that she was working double shifts at the community health clinic in Vanier and driving a 2009 Civic with a cracked back light, and he had met someone whose family owned 3 properties and a boat. She did not hold a grudge. She had simply filed it away in a very secure part of her brain labeled evidence that people disappoint you, and moved on. She was still moving on. She had 6 weeks to find someone willing to attend a black tie wedding in Gatineau with a woman they'd never met, pretend to be her devoted partner, and not embarrass her in front of 140 people, including her former almost mother-in-law, who had always smiled at Haley in that particular way that suggested she found her interesting but ultimately decorative. It did not go well. The first person she asked was a colleague named David, who was kind and available, and then immediately told her he was actually seeing someone and hadn't mentioned it yet. Sorry. The second person was her neighbor Patrick, who was enthusiastic until she explained it was formal, and he revealed he didn't own a suit and couldn't afford one before the date. She bought him a coffee anyway. He seemed like he needed it. By the 3rd week, she had stopped asking people she knew. By the 4th week, she had genuinely considered canceling. By the 5th week, a Thursday afternoon, in late October, she found herself sitting on a bench in Majors Hill Park, eating a sandwich she'd brought from home. Sourdough, leftover turkey, one of those small moments of competence that felt important when the rest of life was disorganized. When she noticed the man on the other end of the bench, he was reading a paperback, old one by the look of it, spine cracked and cover bent in the way books got when they'd been read more than once. He was wearing a dark jacket that had seen better years, jeans with a worn patch at one knee, and boots that were scuffed but well made, the kind of quality you could see even under neglect. He hadn't shaved in a few days, maybe longer. He didn't look like a man who needed anything from her. He looked, actually, like a man who preferred to be left alone. She looked away, ate her sandwich, watched a pair of geese argue near the water with the seriousness of people who had something at stake. Do you always eat lunch with that much intensity? The man on the other end of the bench said, not looking up from his book, or is it just today? Haley blinked. Excuse me? He turned a page. You've been staring at those geese like they owe you money. She looked at the geese. She looked back at him. I have a lot going on. Evidently, he had a dry way of speaking that wasn't unfriendly, exactly. Just precise, like he chose his words the way her father used to choose tools. The right one for the job, nothing extra. I'm Haley, she said. because she didn't know why, but she said it. He looked up then. Gray eyes, she noticed. The kind of gray that wasn't flat but had depth to it, like lake water in November. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Not suspicious, not warm. Something between assessment and mild curiosity. "Noah," he said, "do you come here often?" She winced at herself immediately. I didn't mean that as a few times a week," he said. And the corner of his mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "The geese are entertainment." She laughed, surprised herself. They talked for 20 minutes. She didn't plan to. He asked about the clinic when she mentioned it, asked real questions, the kind that proved he'd listened to what she said before asking the next one. He didn't talk about himself much, and when he did it was brief. He was between projects, taking some time to think, had been in Ottawa about 3 months. He had the manner of someone who was used to being the most capable person in any room, and had decided for now to sit in the park and read instead. She told herself she was not going to ask him. She asked him. "I have a completely unreasonable favor to ask a stranger," she said, "and you can absolutely say no. You should probably say no." He put down his book, actually put it down and looked at her. Gave her his full attention, which was a surprisingly rare quality in a person. "I have to go to my ex-fiancée's wedding next weekend," she said. "Black tie, Ottawa area. I need someone to come with me so I don't walk in alone and spend 4 hours being quietly pitied by people who used to come to my apartment for dinner." She paused. "I'll pay for your suit. Dry cleaning, whatever." He looked at her for a long moment. "You don't know me," he said. "I know. Hence the unreasonable qualifier. I could be anyone." "You're reading Mavis Gallant," she said, nodding at the paperback. "In a park, on a Thursday afternoon. I'm choosing to take that as a character reference." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, but something near it. "What are the terms?" She blinked. "The terms of the arrangement. What's expected? Show up. Be polite. Pretend you're happy to be there. Don't tell anyone we met on a bench 5 minutes ago." She thought for a second. "And if my ex's mother asks how we met, say we met at a gallery opening. She'll find that more believable than the truth." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't need you to pay for anything. The suit. I have a suit." Oh, she hadn't expected that. He didn't look precisely like someone who had a suit. But then she thought about the boots again, scuffed but good, and recalibrated. "Okay, next Saturday, the 14th. He picked up his book. "I'll meet you here at 6, she told Joanna. Joanna said, "Haley, you invited a stranger from a park. He was reading Mavis Gallant. That is not vetting." "It absolutely is a little bit." She spent the intervening week convincing herself she'd made a catastrophic error and then unmade the error in her head and then remade it, in the way anxiety operated when you gave it a whole week and a formal event to work with. She looked him up. Noah, no last name, which was not helpful, and found nothing that confirmed or denied anything. On Saturday the 14th, she arrived at Majors Hill Park at 5 to 6 in a black dress she'd borrowed from Joanna. Floor length, simple. The kind of dress that said "I belong here" without trying too hard. And her own grandmother's earrings, the real ones, the ones she wore when she needed to feel like herself. Noah was already there. He was standing near the bench where they'd met, hands in the pockets of a charcoal suit that fit him, the way expensive things fit people who were used to expensive things. Perfectly, effortlessly, like it had been made for him. He'd shaved. The gray eyes found her immediately. He looked, she thought with mild alarm, like someone you'd notice from across a room. "You clean up," she said. "You seem surprised." "I'm recalibrating." He offered his arm, which was a very specific gesture, formal, deliberate, old-fashioned in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. She took it. "Rules," she said, as they walked toward where she'd parked the Civic. "Don't tell anyone we met last week. Don't disappear on me. If Brendan's mother corners you, your name is Noah. We've been seeing each other for 4 months, and you're vague about what you do for work. Vague how? Consulting. People accept consulting as an answer and never ask follow-up questions." He made a sound that might have been a laugh, suppressed. "Understood. And don't." She stopped walking for half a second. "Don't make me feel pathetic about this. I know it's a strange situation." "I don't need it pointed out." He looked at her. Not the assessing look from the park, something different, more direct. "You're not pathetic," he said. "You're handling something difficult with more composure than most people would. That's not the same thing." She didn't know what to do with that, so she said nothing, and they walked to the car. He looked at the Civic without comment. She appreciated that more than she could say. The Ashford Manor was lit the way only venues that charged $5,000 a night could afford to be. Warm light from every window, the long driveway flanked by white birch trees strung with small lights, the kind of beauty that cost a great deal and looked effortless. Haley had been here once before, years ago, for a colleague's retirement dinner, and she remembered thinking it was the most beautiful, ugly place she'd ever been to. Beautiful to look at, ugly if you knew what it cost. She handed the keys to the valet. The valet looked at the Civic. The valet looked at Noah. Something complicated happened in the valet's expression, a kind of recalibration, and he took the keys without comment. Inside, the foyer smelled like hothouse lilies and money. Haley found her name on the seating card display, guided Noah toward the cocktail reception room, and spent the first 15 minutes navigating the particular social obstacle course of a wedding where half the guests knew her as Brendan's ex. She watched people's eyes move from her to Noah and back again. She watched them recalibrate. She had not expected that part to feel as good as it did. Noah was, she discovered, excellent at this. He had a way of listening that made people feel like the most interesting person in the room. He asked the right questions. He didn't oversell or undersell himself. He was simply present, attentive, unhurried. When Brendan's colleague Mitchell made a slightly condescending comment about the community health sector, Noah said, very pleasantly, "The return on investment for primary care infrastructure is actually better than most people realize." And Mitchell blinked and changed the subject. Haley stored that away. She found Brendan in the cocktail hour crowd. He looked the same, good-looking in the particular way of men who went to good gyms and bought good haircuts, and he came toward her with the confidence of someone who had written the narrative of this moment in advance. "Haley, you came," a smile. "You look wonderful." "Brendan," she smiled back. "Congratulations." His eyes moved to Noah. A very brief, almost invisible assessment. "And this is Noah," Noah said, and shook Brendan's hand in the easy way of someone who had shaken many hands and felt nothing particular about any of them. "Noah and I have been seeing each other for a few months," Haley said. "He just got back from Vancouver." She had made up Vancouver on the spot. She didn't know why she'd said it. "Vancouver," Brendan repeated. "What takes you to Vancouver?" Noah glanced at her, the briefest glance, which she understood to mean, "You started this. I'll follow your lead," and said, "Business. There's a development project I've been involved with out there." "Development," Brendan said. "Like real estate?" "Adjacent," Noah said pleasantly. And then he asked Brendan something about the venue, and Brendan, who enjoyed talking about his own choices, pivoted immediately. Crisis managed. Brendan's mother found her near the dessert table, which Haley had been using as cover since dinner ended. Vivian Falco was a small woman with very straight posture and the kind of face that had been carefully maintained for decades. Not unkind, but watchful. She had always liked Haley in theory, Haley suspected. In practice, she had found her a little inconvenient. "Haley, dear." The smile. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Vivian. It's a beautiful wedding, isn't it?" Vivian looked toward the dance floor, where Brendan was now dancing with his new wife, a tall woman in ivory who moved with the ease of someone who had taken lessons. "Caroline is wonderful. We're just so pleased. She seems lovely," Haley said. "Your friend is charming." Vivian's eyes moved across the room to where Noah was standing with a small group, speaking in the unhurried way he had, and 3 of the 4 people in the group were leaning forward slightly, drawn in. "Very polished." "He is," Haley agreed. "What did you say he does, consulting?" Vivienne made a small sound of acceptance. "He has that look," she said, almost to herself. "You know the look, like someone who runs things." She turned back to Haley with the smile. "I hope it works out, dear. You deserve someone." It was meant kindly, Haley knew. It still landed the way these things always landed. Half compliment, half reminder of deficit. She found Noah at the edge of the terrace later, where the October air was cold enough that most people had retreated inside. He'd loosened his tie slightly. He was looking out at the river, which was dark and silver at this hour, moving in the way water moved at night. Present, and purposeful and indifferent to anyone watching. "You handled Mitchell beautifully," she said. "Mitchell is a person who mistakes confidence for competence," Noah said. "He's easy to redirect. Personal experience? Extensive." She stood beside him. The river moved. Somewhere inside, the band was playing something that was technically a love song, but felt, at this distance, more like background weather. "Why did you say yes?" she said. "Really?" He was quiet for a moment. "You were honest about the situation. Most people aren't." "I told a stranger I needed to not look pathetic at my ex's wedding." "Right. honest. His voice had that dry quality again, but it was warmer now, she thought, than it had been on the bench. And you didn't ask me to be something I'm not. You ask money to be present and polite. That's a reasonable request. She looked at him sideways. The river light caught the edge of his face. He was looking at the water the way he'd looked at her in the park, like he was actually seeing what was there. Are you always this careful with words? She asked. Yes. Is that a professional habit or a personal one? He looked at her then. A long beat. Both, probably. She wanted to ask more. She didn't. There was something in him that felt like a door that was unlocked but not open, and she had a sense, the same instinct that made her a decent clinician, that pushing it would close it. He drove her home. Or rather, she drove him, because she had the car, but he walked her up to the door of her building on Besserer Street and stood on the step while she found her keys. Thank you, she said, genuinely. You didn't have to do any of that. I know. Mitchell's face during that infrastructure comment. He deserved it. She laughed again, the same surprised quality as in the park, like laughter that arrived before she had time to decide about it. She found the key. She looked at him. Can I ask you something? You can ask. What do you actually do? He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that wasn't evasive so much as considered, like he was deciding something. I build things, he said finally. Buildings? Companies. Sometimes buildings. Mostly companies. She waited. He didn't add anything. In Vancouver, she said. Among other places, Noah. She stopped. I don't even know your last name. Something moved across his face, complex and quick and then gone. Kessler, he said. Noah Kessler. The name sat in the air. She didn't know why it felt significant. She didn't know why the way he said it, like he was offering something he didn't usually offer, and was paying attention to how she received it, felt like more than a name. Haley Novak, she said. Since we're apparently being formal. I know, he said. You told me on the bench. She'd forgotten he hadn't. She said goodnight. She went inside. She stood in the elevator and thought about a man who shook hands like he'd done it in boardrooms and sat in parks, and read Mavis Gallant, and said I build things like it was simple. She told herself it was not her business. Joanna sent her a voice message at 7 the next morning that was just 40 seconds of sustained screaming followed by, call me. Haley called her. He's Noah Kessler, Joanna said. I know. He told me. Haley, do you know who Noah Kessler is? A man I met on a bench. He is the founder of Kessler Capital. He has development projects in Vancouver and Calgary, and he just completed a commercial tower on Sparks Street that is literally visible from your apartment window, and he is. Joanna paused for breath. The man is worth about $900 million. Haley sat down. She sat down on the floor of her kitchen, actually, because the chair seemed too far away, and the floor was immediately available. She thought about the scuffed boots, the worn jacket, the bench in the park on a Thursday afternoon, the way he'd said, I'll meet you here at 6, and been there at 5 minutes to. He didn't tell me, she said. Did you ask? He said he was between projects. He said he consulted. He said. She stopped. He said he built things. Haley. He said companies. Sometimes buildings. That is a technically accurate description of being one of the most influential developers in the country. She pressed her palm flat against the linoleum. The floor was cold. It was grounding. She needed grounding. He sat on a public bench and ate lunch and talked to me about geese, she said. He must have been having a normal person day. Joanna, I made him come to Brendan's wedding. I know. I told him to say he was in consulting if anyone asked. I know. He told Mitchell that primary care infrastructure ROI was underrated. That actually sounds like something someone with $900 million would know. I drove him home in my 2009 Civic Haley. He didn't say a word about it. She stared at the fruit bowl on the counter, the hair elastic, the dead battery, the 17 cents. He just got in. She called the number he'd put in her phone, which she had not used once in the week between the bench and the wedding, because she'd been afraid he'd think better of it and cancel. It rang twice. Novak, he said, like he'd been expecting her. You're Noah Kessler, she said. A pause. Then, yes, the Kessler Capital, Noah Kessler. There's only one. Why didn't you tell me? Another pause. Longer this time. She heard something in the background, quiet, interior, the sound of a space that was not a small apartment on Besserer Street. You didn't ask, he said. And then, he stopped, started again. You asked me to come to a wedding as someone who didn't need anything from you. That was a beat. It was a relief, actually. To be that for a day. She didn't speak. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it. She could hear that. I should have told you. You told me your name. I did. I just didn't Google it. No. She sat on the kitchen floor and thought about a man with $900 million sitting on a public bench reading a Canadian author because he wanted a Thursday afternoon where no one wanted anything from him. Were you ever going to tell me? She asked. I was considering it. When? Eventually. A pause. I wasn't expecting. He stopped again in that deliberate way he had, like he was weighing whether to say the next thing. I wasn't expecting to want to see you again. That changed the calculation. She closed her eyes. I need to think, she said. Okay, don't call me. Okay, I'll call you. Okay. And then, Haley. She waited. For what it's worth. The Civic was fine. She ended the call and sat on the floor for a long time. She thought about it for 2 weeks, which was the appropriate amount of time to think about discovering that your fake wedding date was a real billionaire who had sat in a park and pretended to be ordinary because he was tired of being extraordinary. She talked to Joanna, who was unhelpfully romantic about the whole thing. She talked to her colleague, Dr. Renata Pyers, who was more pragmatic and said, "What exactly is the downside here?" in a way that was hard to argue with. She thought about the way he'd said, "You're not pathetic" on the walk to her car. She thought about the way he'd handled Mitchell. She thought about the unlocked door that wasn't open, and what it meant that she was one of apparently very few people he'd handed a key to. She thought about the geese. On a Wednesday evening in November, she walked to Majors Hill Park. The birch trees were bare now, the river steel gray, the bench empty. She sat down. She waited. 20 minutes later, she heard footsteps on the path. She didn't look up. He sat down at the other end of the bench. They were both quiet for a moment. The geese left, she said. Flew south. They'll be back, reliable migratory pattern. Yes. She finally looked at him. The same worn jacket, the same gray eyes, the same quality of stillness, like a man who had decided something a long time ago and was at peace with the deciding. I need terms, she said. He tilted his head slightly. Terms for whatever this is, if it's going to be something. She looked back at the river. No more strategically vague answers. If I ask a direct question, I get a direct answer. Agreed. I'm not going to change what I do. The clinic, the neighborhood, the car. I wouldn't ask you to. And I need you to understand that I spent 14 months rebuilding after Brendan, and I am not going to do that again. So if you're... She paused, steadied herself. If you're not serious, tell me now, and I'll go home. And we'll leave it as a very strange but ultimately pleasant story. He was quiet, not the evasive quiet, the considering kind. I've been sitting on this bench 3 times a week since October, he said finally. Because this is where I met you. That's probably answer enough. She looked at him. He looked at her. The river moved through the cold gray afternoon, indifferent and silver and exactly itself. You're still vague. I'm trying to be honest. The honest version is... He looked at his hands for a moment. Not a nervous gesture, just a human one. I have built things my whole life and been very good at it and very certain about it. And I sat down on a bench one Thursday and you were looking at the geese like they owed you money. And nothing has been entirely certain since. She didn't say anything, he said. That's the direct answer. She pulled her coat tighter against the November wind. She looked at the empty water. She looked at the man beside her. Scuffed boots, gray eyes, $900 million, and a Mavis Gallant paperback, and the particular specific quality of someone who had decided she was worth being honest with. Thursday afternoons, she said. You keep this bench open. It's a public bench. You know what I mean. The corner of his mouth moved, the thing that wasn't quite a smile but was getting closer. Thursday afternoons, he agreed. The bench is open. She stood up. He stood up. She offered him her hand, which was a deliberate inversion. Formal, deliberate, a little wry. He looked at it for a moment, then shook it, and the handshake lasted 1 second longer than a handshake needed to. I'll see you Thursday, she said. She walked home along the river path, the water silver beside her, the bare trees overhead. The city noisy and indifferent in all directions. For the first time in 14 months, she didn't feel like she was moving towards something as much as she was already somewhere.